Members, could you take your seats, please? It's 6:30. Oh, sorry. Let people sit down. Well, here we go. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Policy and Resources Committee meeting 25th of July 2017. Before we start on the agenda, may I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated to enable Mr Bailey to assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask that this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room, not that I can see any members of the public tonight, know that this is taking place, and I cannot see that anybody is indicating that they wish to record. So, Mr Bailey, have we any apologies for absence?
No apologies received, Chairman.
And therefore, presumably no notification of substitute members except Councillor English.
Well, I'm hoping Councillor Harwood will arrive at some point, but in the meantime, I'm substituting for him.
We are expecting him, but he may be delayed. Urgent items? There are no urgent items. Thank you. Agenda item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Can I take officers first, please?
That's right, number 4 first.
I've forgotten to ask if there are any visiting members, but actually I can't see any, so I presume not. Thank you. Sorry, if you'd like to proceed.
Yes, thank you. Just to say that I'm also a director of Maidstone Property Holdings, which is the council's property company, and we'll be discussing that this evening.
Do any other officers have any disclosures? No? Then I do.
Sorry, me as well.
Well, you go first. Okay. Let's do the
I'm acting as the company secretary for Maidstone Property Holdings. It's not an interest, but it's just something to make for the public to be aware of that's being debated tonight.
And I go to the development board for the Kent Medical Campus, but I've also taken advice, and I do not have to leave the room or otherwise declare. Thank you. Just to note then that Councillor Blackmore and Councillor Garland have just arrived. Now you're seated, can I ask you, do you have any disclosures to make? Disclosures of lobbying members. Has anybody been lobbied? No. To consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. We do have 4 Part 2 items. I intend to take these as Part 2. Is that agreed? Thank you. And so if we turn to the minutes, Part 1 of the meeting held on the 29th of March, and that's pages 1 to 12. Before I go into them to ask for accuracy, I know some of you work during the day and may not have had a chance to catch up on your emails. We did ask, and it's recorded in those minutes, that the heat map of fly tipping incidents be emailed out to members. That only went out today. So those of you who may not have caught up with that, it is there. And I have something that I'd just like to say before we look at those minutes, and that is that I have asked that in future we do not have on the top of every page the should you wish to refer any decision, because it actually brings it into the body of the text, and I think we only need it once at the beginning. So with your agreement, Mr Bailey has already agreed that in the agreed minutes that will not be there. So just so that we don't have to debate that at length. So with that, can we go to page, for accuracy, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11 and page 12. Agreed that they are correct record, members, and I can sign them? Thank you very much. Mr. Bailey, I haven't had any notification that we have any presentation of petitions, is that correct? And no questions or answers required for members of the public? No? Then, Mr. Green, if we could turn to page 13 and agenda item 11, the committee programme of work.
I've just one update to add to this, Madam Chairman. There's a report this evening on a property acquisition, and you'll also notice about 8 lines down on page 13, there's a reference to a property acquisition in September. So just to be clear, that's a separate report which will be coming to September's meeting of this committee on another property acquisition, which is currently likely to take place, likely to be brought to the committee then.
Members, any comments? Anything you wish to say? Sorry, Councillor Blackmore, I wasn't sure whose hand it was originally. Thank you.
We seem to have an awful lot for September, but October looks a little light. Is there any likelihood that something may slip to October just to balance out next 2 meetings?
Mr. Green?
Yes, we will certainly review the programme to see if we can achieve that. The nature of these reports is that sometimes they do slip, so it's possible that amongst the September reports there'll be ones that go into October.
Members, that also gives me the opportunity to say we do have quite a heavy agenda tonight with some really important decisions to be made, so I'd be grateful if councillors could think what they want to say it and not repeat what somebody else has said, other than necessarily to say I agree or I disagree. And maybe to try not to keep coming back and back and back, because we will need to move on at a reasonable degree, although I want to have free debate and plenty of time for it. So having said that, could I move to you, Mrs. Culligan, agenda item 12 on pages 14 to 22, which is regarding the disposal of property. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. There are 2 aims to this report.
Yes.
The first is to adopt a policy, or its guidance really, on the disposal of property, and the second is to clarify and amend slightly the procedure for disposing of public open space. And the reasoning for both aims is set out in the report, but briefly. The policy aims to set out in a clear fashion the criteria for assessing property for disposal. It also makes clear that all disposals will have regard to the Council's Parks and Open Spaces 10-year strategic plan. The aim of the policy is that all people dealing with decisions, members and officers, will have a clear framework within which to make those decisions. In respect of the change in procedure, this only relates to disposals of open space, where the legislation requires that the proposal is advertised for 2 weeks and the decision maker takes into account any representations during that time. I must make clear that the current procedure we are using, i.e. that HCL takes a decision to advertise and Policy and Resources takes a decision to dispose, is not in the Constitution. I believe it may, in fact I know it's a hangover from the Cabinet system. In order to make the process simpler and to overcome some of the problems caused by 2 different committees considering the decisions, I've considered the procedure together with David Tibbett and Lucy Stroud, and have also discussed it together with Alison and the directors in a meeting with the group leaders. So the recommendation is that decisions to advertise and dispose should sit with HCL, which is the committee with the responsibility for open space. Both the terms of reference of Policy and Resources and the Council's contract procedure rules for land transactions make clear that the responsibility for all disposals and acquisitions of land sits with Policy and Resources, with delegated authority to the Director of Finance and Business Improvement up to the level of £100,000. That procedure also gives the Director the responsibility to advertise the disposal of open space. The proposed amendments do not change the contract procedure rules for land transactions except in respect of the procedure for disposing of open space. It's also proposed that the delegation to the Director of Finance and Business Improvement remains up to the existing financial limit. It's been suggested that the delegation is not used where a matter is particularly controversial. I don't think it's necessary to write that into the Constitution, since it is impossible to cover all eventualities. However, as has been shown in recent months, the Director, and through him the property team, will always refer a matter to committee if it is particularly controversial. The question has also been raised about disposals of property from other committees' portfolios, e.g. planning. However, this amended procedure is only proposed for disposals of public open space, which fall within HCL's remit. The disposals of all other types of land are stated to be the responsibility of Policy and Resources unless delegated. In fact, the other service committees do not have responsibility for land or property. If, however, the disposal of open space is related to a planning issue, for example, the report to HCL should include comments from the chairman of SPST or planning, if appropriate. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Borden.
Thank you very much. I think I don't have a strong view on whether this issue of whether HCL deals with it all or it comes back to P&R. I think on balance, probably it's best if it goes to, if HCL deals with it, just because it's, I think they're capable of doing so in the committee system. There's a couple of amendments I'd be quite keen on seeing in Appendix 1. Firstly, the first line, page 19, under the heading of open space, I personally don't feel the first sentence is needed, on the sense it makes a presumption that may or may not be the case heading into the future. So I'm not quite sure. I just don't see the need for it, to be honest. And secondly, heading over the page to page 20, in the second paragraph down, where it references section 1.23 of the Local Government Act 1972 about advertising in a local newspaper. Now, local authorities have found this, from my experience, to be a bit of a thorny issue, to say, with land disposals, because, of course, advertising in a local newspaper is a very broad definition. So I was wondering, while we have the opportunity in front of us tonight to, in effect, set this overarching policy, whether we would be interested in taking the opportunity to perhaps tighten that up, and by saying, rather than in a local newspaper, in prominent local newspapers, for example, within the particular area. The reason being is that perhaps a local newspaper, the definition of that will be different to one person as it is to somebody else. Whereas if you put a prominent local newspaper, that would more or less, and it's a far tighter definition, people would be able to agree on what the prominent newspaper is. So, for example, here it would be the Kent Messenger, Downs Mail. So, but all in all, I think this is a pretty good idea. I think it's much needed. They're just two very, very minor, and I accept they're minor amendments, which I think would help the documents in front of us. And I'd be interested to hear what other committee members say about it.
Mrs. Callaghan, did you want to come back on the first point? I think the second point, it would be interesting to hear what other councillors have to say. But on the first point that was mentioned.
I think just to... sorry, I'm being blinded by the... sorry, Sam, you couldn't sort out the thing, could you? Yeah. Yes, it's that one. I feel irradiated. That's better. That's what it's for. The first sentence under the paragraph of open space, I mean, it doesn't need to go in there. I think that's simply, why did I put that in there? I think that was simply to reiterate a statement that we've put in the Parks and Open Spaces plan, strategic plan, but it can come out. It doesn't, I mean, the purpose of that paragraph is to say that further down that all disposals will have regard to the 10-year strategic plan, you know, because obviously the two of them need to tie together. But that sentence can come out. It's not, you know, it's either here or there, really. And on the second point, if I may I just have a thing? The thing about Section 123 of the Local Government Act, my view, if I may, is that why would you make a legislative requirement more onerous than it is? If it says we have to advertise it in a local paper, then we have to advertise it in a local paper. I think if you start saying a prominent local paper, you start to get into arguments about who thinks what paper is a prominent local paper. But you know, that's just...
Members, just to simplify matters, in view of the advice about the first point that Councillor Borden made, for clarity, then is the committee agreed that that should come out? First of all, are you proposing that?
Yes, I will propose that.
Yeah, and you'll second that, Councillor English? All right, so in that case, could we have a show of hands for those who agree that that first paragraph should come out? Sorry, the first sentence. Yes. And the word however, yes. No. Is anybody against? Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just coming back to the original recommendations, I'm always in favour of simplification if we can, and I think going through 2 service committees I never think is a very good idea. So where we can simplify the process, I think that's right, and I think I would agree with and support the recommendation that in case of open spaces, which is the responsibility of the HCL committee, then it's their decision that should count, I think, in this case. I entirely support the recommendation. I think the issue of a local or prominent local paper, it obviously does bring a bit of subjectivity into it, and I understand where they're coming from. However, I do think perhaps a local newspaper is a bit restricted, so I do support what Councillor Borton has said. But one other point I would like to make, and it's again on page 20 of Appendix 1, and it's under the leasehold disposal. And basically, it's the second sentence, because I don't understand why the council will usually only dispose of property to parish council, community groups, etc. I don't know why parish councils and community groups are being singled out in this, and I think what we used to say in the United Nations groups I worked in, Australian drafting, and I would like to see this deleted. Thank you.
Mrs. Callaghan, would you come back on that point? Councillor, no, just a minute. Councillor English will remain until the end of this item, at which point then perhaps we can do the handover.
I just want to say I really do welcome the amendment that Councillor Borton made earlier, and we've agreed to, because and I personally think that sentence shouldn't be in the Parks Plan, because it strictly defined, it gets in the way of some of our aspirations to transfer potentially set up nature reserves governed by trusts and other things, and it would have prevented, strictly interpreted, doing that, including the disposal on a long lease of land to Fant Wildlife Group. So I welcome that. But in terms of the debate we're having now in newspapers, Kent on Sunday is a local newspaper. It is not circulated door to door in Maidstone Borough Council area, unlike the Downs Mail, which is somewhat erratic, but goes to a significant number of people and is definitely read by fewer people even now than the Kent Messenger. So I think there is an issue, because according to legislation, we could put an advert in the Kent on Sunday, which hardly anyone would see. And I do think we do need some sort of definition, if only for our internal guidance, because that would comply. Indeed, technically, if we put an advert in the Tunbridge press that circulates in Staplehurst and some other parts of South Maidstone, that would comply. But, you know, if you put an advert in that press about Fant or Bridgeward or something, it really wouldn't be... I'm not saying anyone would do that, but we have to be careful about how we define local newspaperiness for our own purposes, even if the legislation is less onerous, because we do need to actually make sure that we're being fair and actually putting adverts in newspapers that people can actually have a reasonable chance of seeing. But apart from that, and on the leasehold thing, I do understand where Councillor Perry is coming from, because there probably needs to be some further work on what is included and what isn't included going forward, because there are other bodies, that charities, trusts and so on, that might be appropriate to include there. And that's that, and I will hand over to Councillor Harwood.
Thank you. In respect to the last item about a newspaper, would it not be worth considering our own council newsletter, which we've just launched? And if we look at page 31, it seems to be intended to build it up to four editions a year. So if we're going to have that published on a quarterly basis, I would have thought that might be a good way, since we're paying the post office to deliver it to every house. So that might be worth giving consideration to. But the main point I wanted just to say was my personal preference would have been to keep the reference with this to P&R, but I accept that everybody, the committee obviously doesn't feel that way. But my main concern is about the delegation figure, this £100,000, only in the sense of if we're looking at declaring a site or a piece of land surplus, and if it starts to raise local concern, and frankly, given the difficulty people finding these adverts in any paper, one or more people raising a concern is probably significant and probably signifies there's more level of concern. I would just be thinking that should come back to the full committee to consider, rather than being delegated to an officer, because it's for two reasons. One, obviously, public accountability of the councillors making the decision if there's any contention around it. And secondly, we don't want officers being pulled into making, if you like, what could be seen as political decisions in terms of disposal of public land. So I just wonder whether we could, think about that point a bit further.
I think I'll hear the other people who wish to speak first, and then we'll come back to the officers and try and pick up the threads of what everybody's saying. Councillor Bryce, you're next, and Councillor Garland, you followed on.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just really quickly, I've got the readership figures in front of me. So you're comparing slightly different things. So you've got a monthly title. The Downs Mail has a reach of about 156,000. And then the KM for our area has a weekly readership of around just under 90,000. So, you could take a judgment call on, what that reach is. But it's probably not vastly different, to be quite honest. And then one's a monthly title, one's a weekly title. So by pinning it down to a percentage of who reads, then you're constricting yourself anyway, because a monthly title may give you less flexibility anyway. But I would probably take this offline, to be honest, in terms of what you're trying to achieve here. And if you're trying to achieve a minimum reach, then whichever way you're coming at this, you're going to miss anybody that doesn't pick up a newspaper and anybody that prefers digital media, which is younger folk anyway. So I think you're going to open up a whole can of worms here, potentially. So if we haven't had any legal challenges to what we've been doing for a number of years, then if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Thank you, Chairman. I think pedantry is creeping into this debate already. I think the question is, do we want a policy for land disposal? The answer to that is yes. Does this particular policy, as set out in the papers, give us that approach? The answer is yes, I think. I think the point about leasehold properties, yes, we should be making a caveat that usually, though not absolutely, usually we would only sell it to parishes and community groups on a leasehold basis. I don't have a problem with that. So I think the papers are set out before us. meet all the points that we wish to have. I trust officers to choose the right newspaper to go and advertise in, so I don't think we need to go into that level of detail in this particular report. So in terms of the two key questions we have before us, do we want a policy? Yes. Does this cover all the major attributes? Yes. I therefore propose the recommendations on the papers as they stand.
I am going to let other people speak, but I'm going to ask you to be nice and short and precise. So I think I said the order, didn't I? So it was Councillor Garland, it was Councillor Gooch was next.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have a slight concern about the leasehold, whether or not we sell to parishes or not. And I do think that as long as it says should, I mean, I was looking near the top of page 20, the disposal must also be made for best consideration. Can we not say should, and then that could cover parish councils as well, if they're asking for a freehold? But I am keen that we consider we have the ability to allow property to be either given or sold at a lower price to parish councils and community groups. I'm keen on that. The other concern I had has been mentioned, which is about the delegation of officers, delegation to officers. I think we can certainly delegate to officers. I trust them if there have been no objections to the advert. If there have been no objections, great, delegate. But if there have been objections, it's got to come back to committee.
Councillor Blackmore.
I think everything I wanted to say has already been said. Just to say I'm happy with the recommendations, and I'm a little bit concerned that this committee is starting to get bogged down in the weeds.
Councillor Hastie. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say that I appreciate there has been a difficulty in the past with differences of opinion between this committee and the HCL committee, but I am not happy about delegating this responsibility to a subordinate committee. I think it should remain here, and if necessary, we shall declare whether something is open space or not.
Your point of view is noted. Right. Just to pick up, I don't think anybody else indicated, just to pick up on a few things. The issue of with whom we actually advertise it, first of all, there's a time scale in which you need to do it, and that plays into this. And while I hear what you say, I think we have to have some trust in the officers that they will actually advertise it in the appropriate place and the appropriate time scale so that the people it needs to get to will actually get it. And as Councillor Bryce said, I think once I recall we made a slip up somewhere, but once in all the number of times we have to do it. And also councillors have a responsibility too. If you know there's something coming up in your patch, then make sure the people in your patch know about it. So that's that side of it. I would like the officers to come back about the delegated responsibility, because I don't think people are actually saying they don't agree with councillors being officers being able to do it. It doesn't have to go back to HCL if everything's in the gardens rosy. But I think the issue is if when responses come back or it's clear it's proving to be very sensitive in an area, how that would be handled. And I'd like to just hear your views on how we could have some surety for councillors that it will go back to committee in those cases.
In amending the terms of reference, I could certainly say that the existing delegation says that, which is basically under the delegations for policy and resources. So at the moment, policy and resources has all the remit for dealing with property disposals, acquisitions, open space, the whole lot, with a delegation to the Director of Finance and Business Improvement up to the limit of £100,000. So I'm going to make some amendments to that, as expressed on the report, to say that the responsibility for making the for doing disposals of open space sits with HCL, with the existing delegation to the director up to £100,000. So I could put in some additional wording that says something like, except in circumstances where there have been representations to the advert or there has been evidence of significant local concern, something like that? Yes. Yeah.
Members, yes, I haven't forgotten you, Councillor Price. Members, in broad brushstrokes, are you happy for that to be looked at? I don't think it affects the recommendations here, but we can look at that and get some wording in. Councillor Bryce, very quick.
I'm really sorry to come back. I've just got Sarandon Field stuck in my head, and that came to the committee without a value assigned, didn't it? Came to this committee without a value assigned, and then we were kind of discussing whether or not we assign a value to it. So in that scenario, would that land have been disposed without any reference to committee? Because some pieces of land we have a discrepancy about what value could or should be assigned to them. But I don't want to get stuck on that. But I don't know if you have a view on that.
Councillor Bryce, my understanding is that we always have an independent person do the valuation. It's not so there should, you know, so if we're, and that's usually if something's freehold, and that's very rare anyway. Do you want to come in, Chief Exec? I did notice you, Councillor Perry. Just let me say on the final point, which was about the word usually. The word usually means to me precisely that. It does not preclude sale to other organisations. It just says usually. If people really are hung up on that, then you'll have to recommend an amendment. But otherwise, I'm supporting Councillor Garland here. Councillor Perry, you indicated very quickly.
Yeah, I will be very quick. Yes, I am down in the weeds, and I don't really care because, quite frankly, these things can come and bite your backside if you don't get them right, because the detail. And I am concerned about the position of community groups and parish councils. And I don't like the second sentence on page 20, the one which is the word usually. I know it's got usually. I don't know why parish council community groups are being highlighted. I think that's wrong. I still maintain that I would like that deleted. I'm sorry to be down in the weeds, but sometimes you have to. Thank you.
Are you actually recommending that that is deleted? Is that seconded by anybody? Councillor Borton? All right, I will go to the vote on... Get some clarity. How about some advice first? Yes, advice first.
Can I just say that that sentence about how we normally dispose of to parish councils, community groups, etc., was a direct quote from the property team at Maidstone, who said that this is how they normally do operate with parishes, community groups, etc., for disposals of pieces of land. It doesn't mean to say that the leasehold will be, you know, the leasehold period can be for 80 years, 90 years, something like that. But I think the explanation they gave me was so that in general, the Borough Council can still retain an element of control over that land for the future, but it doesn't preclude disposals of freehold. And in fact, recently we did have a disposal of freehold to a parish council, I believe. But I think if you don't say that, I think it sort of starts to stray into, I don't know. I just think it starts to stray into sort of vagueness, yes, because that is the usual practice, and it seems to have worked quite well. And it's a process that's understood.
I really don't want us to get bogged down with this forever, because we are not lawyers. But Councillor Borton.
Yeah, I think this actually comes down to precisely what we voted on half an hour ago about the sentence that we deleted on page 19, where it was making a presumption, in my view, and that's what it is. This sentence that Councillor Perry is talking about is this time round. And if we've got an overarching policy, I think it's got to be precisely that. And it can't make a presumption because it worked all right in the past and because it's in this strategy, because these strategies might change as well over time, and this policy won't. So I'm very wary of the word usually when it comes to issues such as this. I just think it's a bad word to use in these sorts of documents, and as Councillor Perry says, is unnecessary. And just finally, I'm not going to die in a ditch over the idea of changing that phrase on a local newspaper, but a quick Google search will show many, many occasions in which this has got local government, local authorities into an awful lot of trouble. And I'll leave it there, but if this ever happens in Maidstone, I think we will regret not changing that.
Councillor Garland.
I think it's incredibly important to leave that second sentence in for two reasons. One, it is an approach that this has worked well for the local parish councils and community groups, and has also worked well for us as a local authority. Secondly, it's important when you're entering into negotiations about release of land, sale of land, that you manage people's expectations as to what they're likely to be negotiating on. So for us to take that particular sentence out will do precisely as the legal officer has said, introduce an element of vagueness right at the start of any negotiations. Now, if it is the case, and it is the case, that land has been negotiated with local community groups and parishes on a leasehold basis, then that should continue where it is necessary to do so, which is why I imagine officers have been very careful and used the word usually, because there will be instances in the future where freehold disposal may be appropriate. But I think it's important that parishes and community groups know that if they approach us to buy land, that it will usually be on a leasehold basis. So they have expectations of what they can anticipate from us, and we're quite clear on our approach on that basis as well. So I think that should be left in for those reasons as well. But in addition to that, I'd refer to Mark Green on this. I imagine if we're usually disposing of it on a freehold basis, then that will have an impact on our capital account as well. And that may have, I don't know, it may be too small to have any resonance, but it may have a negative impact on our ability to borrow against that capital account in the future. So I think it's very important for us to leave that sentence in, and therefore I won't be supporting Councillor Perry's amendment.
I will have to actually go to the vote on the amendment, but I am going to just point something out. The papers in front of you, almost entirely, are the standing instructions that we have for disposal, however it happened, whether it came in the way it was before. If it went to HCL for the first bit and then came to P&R, they are the general rules that this council works under. All we are really being asked to do here is not discuss how we change all the basic principles this council has worked under for a long time, as Councillor Garland has said, have served us well. We are being asked to change the bit that is a hangover from the cabinet system, which is that we had a two-tier system, and just really putting it to heritage, culture and leisure. So I will have to go to the vote on Councillor Perry's amendment. Those in favour of it, please. Yes, I'm sorry, I keep being asked and don't do it. Could you please turn your name tags round so that they're actually facing not yourself but the room? They were put round that way because people come in and say, I don't know where I'm sitting. And then once you sit down, you need to turn it round. So if we can just have it round the right way. Thank you. So those in favour of Councillor Perry's amendment, will you please show? 3. Those opposed, against, will you show? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, I think. 11. Any abstentions? I think that was 1 abstention. That has clearly failed. And so we go to the recommendations on the papers. Do I need to take them separately, or are you happy to take them all as one? Yes.
I did press it. Obviously, it didn't come. Councillor Garland actually moved the recommendation on the papers, but we'd already amended it. So.
Councillor Garland, with that one amendment that was made to delete that first paragraph. That's the that first sentence. Yes, are you happy with that? And you're happy with that too. Therefore, please, I go to the vote on that. Those in favour of the recommendations on page 14 with that one amendment. Sorry, did you want to say something, Councillor McGrath?
I would prefer you to vote separately on the three recommendations, if you don't mind, Chair.
Happy to do so. Do I need to read them out to the members, or can I just say recommendation 1? Thank you. Recommendation 1, those in favour, please show. Those against? 1. Abstentions? 2. Thank you. Recommendation 2. Those in favour? Those against? 3. Abstentions? That should add up. Recommendation 3. Those in favour? 12. Those against? 2. Abstention? 1. Thank you, members. Right. Thank you, Mrs. Callaghan. Councillor Harwood, would you move round, because your name is actually in that position, so... Yeah, I haven't forgotten. She's staying to the end, though, isn't she? Yes. Members, if you'll just bear with me a moment. Councillor Harwood, do you have any declarations to... Councillor Harwood, do you have any declarations of interest in it? No? Have you been lobbied? No. Thank you very much. Members, if we move to agenda item 13, which you will find on page 49. 49? We've done that one. Page 49. Item 13, page... Have I got a different...
23. Sorry, I think I replaced that one.
All right. Thank you very much.
23.
Thank you. All right. It is page 23. Let me get to it. And we go to you, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think all members will agree that communications are essential, particularly in the current environment where, possibly unfairly, after Grenfell Tower, local authorities are taking quite a lot of flack. So it's really important that the good things that we at Maidstone do as a council are advertised. And for this reason, last year at your meeting last October, you agreed a communication strategy which set out a framework for communicating with our various audiences. And members were all agreed about the strategy, or the need for a strategy, although there were differences of opinion about how we would go about implementing it. And the strategy that you agreed last year had an action plan attached to it, and we've got on and delivered that action plan over the past 9 months. And the action plan wasn't just something that officers were doing on your behalf. It was seen as a joint enterprise with you as members, and so a member sounding board was set up, which has met regularly over the past year, where we've discussed with you the various actions that have been taken. And this report sets out some of the things that have been achieved. They're highlighted on page 25 of the report. And I won't go into those in detail, but you can see all the things that have happened. I would, though, just add a couple of things that are very recent that it's worth mentioning as well. First of all, the resident survey that is underway at the moment, where the communications team and members have been out and about, talking to residents, getting their views on the council and their aspirations for the borough. The team was out in Jubilee Square on Saturday, Yalding the previous Saturday, and I know, because I was at Yalding myself, how useful it is to talk to people directly about what they think of the council, and looking forward to visiting Staplehurst this coming Saturday. And we're very grateful to members who've taken part in those sessions. You're very welcome, and it's good to see you there. The other thing I just flag up as an instance of the good work that communications are doing is the scaffolding collapse at Midhurst Court last week, which I'm sure you've all heard about, where communications did a lot of work behind the scenes, liaising with Golding Homes, who were the owner of Midhurst Court, and making sure that messages got across, particularly on social media, about the rest centre that we had set up, and the fact that refreshments were available there, and so on. So that's a good example of the kind of practical things that the communications team can do. The other thing that this report does is set out an updated action plan saying what we're now planning to do over the next year, and that starts on page 29. And inevitably, this is just headlines about the various actions that we're going to be undertaking. But Helen Bell, on my left, Communications Manager, can fill you in on the details. So Helen and I were very happy to take any questions that you may have. So basically, you're invited to comment on the action plan and approve it if you're happy with it. Thank you.
Councillor Garland.
What I see here is all fair enough, and promotes the council as an entity, and projects the council what it can do to residents, and that's all in there. But what it doesn't seem to pick up is liaising with local business communities, communicating with them. I'm sure a lot of that could be washed up in certain sections of this, but there's nothing specific highlighting the council's communication strategy vis-à-vis businesses and employment organisations as well. And I think if you want a more holistic approach to the communications, then that should be added to it.
Mr Green or Mrs Bell, do you want to come back on that?
Thank you for your comment. Yes, I think that's a really valid point, and I would be happy to explore that further. And we are working more closely with the Mayor this year, who obviously has a very business-focused agenda, and we recently attended the Business Awards for Maidstone, so we are more keen to promote that, and obviously working with John Foster's team as well. So, yes, I would definitely take that on board and would be happy to put that into the action plan.
Councillor Borton.
Thank you very much. I've got a few questions going through the documents in front of us. First things first, where's the support level? High, medium? I assume there's a low in here somewhere. Can we have a bit more detail as to what's the difference between high and medium support, for example? Are we talking personnel? Are we talking resource? Are we talking extra cash thrown in? What sort of communication strategies are sort of being employed within each of these? My second question is, and the thing that got me was page 30, use resident data to target 18 to 24-year-olds over 75 and BME. It's absolutely fine, but why those specific groups? Why do we need to do more for them than, let's say, 25 to 35-year-olds, for example? Also, I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a list here. Shall I just read them out? Also, page 30, can we have a bit more detail on the narrative report, please? I have no idea what a narrative report actually is, if I'm being totally honest. I'm going to leave the points about the Borough Insight magazine to come, because I've got a few questions on that. But in essence, I'm not quite sure if the concept's doesn't appeal to me, to be honest. And also, just a little personal gripe on page 32 with the refreshed Wakey, which is the highlight of my week when it pops in the email inbox, which is very good and very sort of very helpful to know, but what's actually going to change here? What's going to change about the Wakey Wakey to make me look forward to receiving it even more? And just a little personal gripe, we always get this email every single week telling us what's in the Kent Messenger. Is it really necessary? Because if I want to know what's in the Kent Messenger, I'd probably pick it up, in all honesty. I just think that it's all fine and well circulating that to staff and councillors, but is it, should we circulate it to residents as well to prevent them buying the Kent Messenger? Why don't we do it for the Downs Mail? Why don't we do it for the Kent on Sunday? Sorry, I'm on one here, but they're basically my initial questions.
Thank you. Okay, so just going through, the first question you asked about was the levels of support. So at the bottom there's a key which indicates what that means. So it's basically the level of support that the communications team are going to give to that particular objective. So I think I'm just going to try and find the page where it indicates the key for that. Sorry, I just can't find it now. I just showed it to you and I can't find it. Can you see it? It is. It is in there, but that is what it is. That basically it relates to the level of support that. So it's the focus that the team have. So it's a really key priority. Then it's a high level of support that the team will give to that particular objective. If it's a little bit more less sort of urgent, then obviously that support level will reduce, and that's what that means. On to the question around specific groups. Those are identified through our consultations team. We have obviously run a lot of consultations as a council, and we get various responses from different members of the public, and those groups are harder to reach, and that's been proven by the responses to our consultations. So that's why they've been identified in the comm strategy as groups that we need to engage with more and look at how we focus our communications to them. Mark can take questions regarding the narrative report.
The narrative report accompanies the statement of accounts, and if you look at the statement of accounts that went to Audit Committee in June and came to this committee at its last meeting, it's basically a 7 or 8 page summary of how we've performed in the last year, both in terms of our financial performance and in relation to performance indicators. So it's a user-friendly summary of how the council has done over the past year.
Thank you. And moving on to the question around Wakey Wakey, I'm pleased that you have some positive feedback about that. When we say it's going to change, we're purely looking at a refresh in the way that it looks. The content we are being told is popular. People like the mix of events and sort of ongoing messaging and things that are happening in the council. So it's not drastic. It's purely just looking at how it's presented. The format now is quite out of date. So we're just exploring other options within the team. And the Kent Messenger review, which obviously isn't mentioned within the report, but I will address that. Again, we have very positive feedback that councillors do like to receive that, as do heads of service, who haven't obviously had a chance to read it, particularly when the local plan hearings were going on. They were struggling to keep track of all of the coverage that was coming through and the comments that were being made. So it became quite a useful tool for officers to have. But again, I'm open to discussion around that. Clearly, for the team, it might not be seen as the best use of our time to sit and go through, but we need to be on top of what's going in the paper and how our comments are being featured. So we do it anyway, but obviously to then reiterate it through an email, if it's not useful, then of course it's something that we can look at in terms of feedback.
Yes, do come back.
Yeah, I'll just come back on the first point, really, which is the one that's bugging me in terms of resource. I appreciate what you said there, Helen, but what is a high level of support? How many people are we talking about? How many hours a week are we talking about here? What's the difference between high and a medium? Have you factored into this instances where, so achieving some of these strategies will be a very short-term intensive burst over a couple of weeks perhaps, others will be a longer-term issue over the course of the year. Basically, what I'm really looking for is some sort of figure in terms of enabling the sort of communications team to identify areas where this is what we're expecting to be slightly busier. This is going to be more demand on us. This is where perhaps if it's an issue where we've got a link with another department of the council where they can take on some of the burden instead of us. That's really what I'm looking for. I'm just concerned. It's very hard for me, to be brutally honest, to adopt a strategy in front of me which has got sort of high, medium levels of support without knowing more of what that actually means, because we're not at the council all day, every day, and we're not sort of, nor should we, be sort of aware of the sort of the day-to-day run-ins, but we need to have an overall sort of perspective as to what's to what the demands on your time are and what additional demands might come out of that. So I'm particularly concerned about that and actually the impact it'll have on your team.
Thank you. Yes, obviously this support level was included within the strategy and action plan that was presented to committee last year. I believe there was a discussion around that then. If you have another suggestion for how you would like us to explain it, but it's essentially where our focus is going to be. We couldn't predict how many hours it would take to do certain things because, like you say, there would be an ongoing focus. So, for example, if you take promoting pride in Maidstone, that would be an ongoing thing that we'd be trying to filter out through our messaging, but it would be a key focus for us. So we would be making sure that members of the team would know that that's a key objective for us, is to promote pride. If you move down to highlighting everyday work for the grounds maintenance team, for example, that's obviously a priority, but in order for us to be able to plan our day and our work and our year ahead, we had to look at how the team would operate in terms of certain objectives. So that's how it's been explained. But I'm happy to look at another way of explaining it if you have a suggestion for the action plan.
Councillor Borton, perhaps you'd like to talk to Mrs Bell outside the meeting if you do have a suggestion about how it can be better. All right, thank you. Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Helen, and the communications team for the action plan. I think this is a really tricky job, actually, because you're trying to give us your strategy as a team, but you're trying to give us enough tactical detail of what you're going to do to actually bring it to life for us. So it's a tricky mix, really. And I think sometimes things get pulled out and we get slightly obsessed by them. And actually what you're trying to do is just give us a bit of a flavour, really, of what your priorities are and how you're mapping out your year. We do get obsessed about the detail because that's what we get elected to do. And I think there's a lot of policy in here, but no resources. And I know much of your resource sits internally, so it's not necessarily a cost that you can give. But whenever I've worked in a commercial organisation, these elements could all be costed, whether or not it's your, what your hourly rate is or number of hours or something like that. And I think we'd be quite interested to see that and also just have anything flagged that does have an external cost pressure associated with it. For example, engaging with residents through new and existing channels, maybe getting a bit of advice or a bit of analysis on social media strategy if that's not available within the current analytics packages that you have access to currently. So I don't want to get bogged down in the detail, but I wouldn't mind, given the financial constraints we're facing as a council, really getting a little bit more detail on that. I don't know the best way of facilitating that, really.
I think what I'm going to suggest is that we don't actually discuss that further, but we leave that with Mr Green, who obviously heads up the whole department, to see if there's a way that we can make it clearer for councillors how the time is allocated. And I think what everybody's asking is whether we actually have enough resources to do the job we wish that department to do well. And I think that's what underlies this. So it's not something we can really discuss further here. I'm going to come to everybody else, but it's not something we can really discuss further in detail here. Mr Green, can we leave that with you to think through and then come, because it does imply, though, that we bring something back a little minute. Yes. Bring something back that we can actually look at, which may make it more understandable and make us decide whether we think that perhaps we need a few more resources in there, although we'll have to bear that in mind against all the other pressures that we actually have. Councillor Perry, you were next.
Thank you. Well, I do agree with points raised by Councillor Borton and Councillor Bryce. I won't repeat them. But financial constraints are crucial here. One thing I would ask is, have you considered outsourcing some of this work? Because clearly it's a resource issue, and you're talking about internal resources, but maybe it is more productive to outsource some of these points. It's only a question. The other thing I just wanted to raise, and I mean, I've read this, and I'm a great believer in communication. I do believe that. And at whatever level we're at, I think it's important we do communicate. So I'm on your side on that, definitely. One thing I would ask is that when you're writing articles, do you involve the ward councillors? Because if you're writing an article on a particular ward, then I think it's absolutely essential that at the first port of call, you actually contact the councillors involved, because they are often closer to the issues on the ground and can help. I do think that's a very important issue.
Mrs. Bell, do you want to...
Thank you. In regards to your first point about outsourcing activities, yes, we have considered this. We're actually in the processes of proposing one of the activities, which is about promoting Maidstone to businesses. It's not in here at the moment because the decision hasn't been made about how we approach that in relation to the bid that we're doing. Yes, we've put together a costings for that to go out to an external agency. We do know our limitations within the team. We do know that obviously we can be stretched at times. So we're aware that there are other options. Clearly that would have to be closely managed in order that we get the result that we're looking for. But yes, it's certainly not something that we would, not do. In relation to writing articles and involving ward members, yes, I completely agree with your point. This has been raised to me already, and it is something which I do believe we should do, and we need to do more regularly. So it is something that we are changing within the team.
Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I think the report at Appendix 1, the actual action plan, is very well and plainly set out. I agree with some of the things that Councillor Bryce and Councillor Borton have said. I think Borough Insight looks about right where we should be. It shouldn't be too glossy. I think you've chosen just the right mark to hit, so it doesn't look like we're spending too much money. And I hope that, as you've set out in here, the next 4 issues are as good as we've got here. I do think you have covered a bit of business in here on page 8. I was just thinking the best way to start with business, if we're going, is the starting business, and the terrace was quite a good way to cover it, I thought. But anyway, that's fine. I think the other parts that you use here to highlight the Love Maidstone strategy you've got, I won't go on to the bag that poo bit, but I'm sure that'll work very well as well. I think it's very plainly set out for us. I do agree it would be lovely for us to know the involvement of how much time and effort you're putting into this, just so that we can see, and if we need to, rechannel some more money or funds if that's needed. So other than that, I'd be happy to move as on papers if that's possible.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think the only comment I'd like to make relates to the issue at Midhurst Court last week, when I think the council sort of went into overdrive, remessaging, etc., which actually was completely and utterly necessary. However, I don't feel that that kind of situation is picked up here, where there's an emergency, where we've had to open rest centres in the past, whether that's been something in Yaldings, something at the leisure centre here. It's not picked up, and that emergency type of situation, I think, is something that the emergency teams have done really, really well. And it's just not reflected. A lot of this is very much not the day-to-day stuff we do, but not the really important things we do. And I think last week was a great example, but I don't quite get a feel it fits in here. But I do think that that kind of messaging in an emergency, whether it relates to an incident like Midhurst or indeed flooding, I feel that ought to be included somewhere, but I don't really know where. So I'm sorry, that's very unhelpful, but I just think it should be in there.
Did you want to come back briefly?
Thank you. Yes, I think you're right. I think in terms of the Council's emergency response and the plan and the comms team's sort of protocols, it would be useful to pick that up so that people understand that we're involved in that as much as obviously lots of other officers. So I'm happy to include that within that. Like you say, I will have to look at where that can be included, but it's important and it is something which we have to be ready for. So.
Okay. Just to come back on that point, I think that is probably the time when the communications team are needed the most, when you have got a major incident. So I take your point, Mrs. Bell, when you say that there are other departments within the council that are involved. However, my feeling is that is when actually your team should be at the forefront, because if we don't get those relevant messages out quickly enough, then I think we open ourselves up to criticism from residents, the media, whoever. So, if anything, that's probably one of the most important omissions to this document.
Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. I certainly take the point about resources, because I was thinking, if you look at paragraph 2.4 on page 24, I appreciate that there are two quite distinct teams that have been brought together in order to make the most of the skills and the resource time available, but we do need to be careful that that doesn't rebound, say, on a particular tourist attraction or trying to promote tourism in one of the outer areas or something. So that's a fair point. Having said that, this is a good report. I think the action plan is very good. I like the way it's been updated. You've really done what it says on the tin here. What I'm particularly pleased about is the progress that's been made within the council. We're all very keen to know about what's going on outside, and I know that you try and keep the lid on Facebook. Something's going to happen in somewhere, and somebody says something out of turn, and you're bending over backwards to respond quickly, and actually I don't think that's in here either. But having said that, excellent Borough Insight for a first edition, and I do hope you let us know what the feedback's going to be on that. But I think it was flipping good. The monthly members' bulletin, that has only just started, but what a great way of keeping everybody informed, because it releases the pressure on certain, whether you're a chairman, whether you're a group leader, whether you're a rep, having that monthly bulletin just, list the committees, and I think that's great. The other one I wanted to just mention was the member sounding board. If any member of any group is not happy, get hold of your rep and say, oi, bring this up at the next member sounding board. So we have made, I think, some really terrific steps forward. So thank you very much for that. And I certainly support having this recommendation go forward with the points that have been raised. Thank you.
Councillor Borton and Councillor Bryce, you've both indicated you want to come back. Please make it brief.
I'll be very, very brief. Just a very quick one on the Borough Insights. It's all right. But there's one thing on page 3. I'm going to be very nice to you, Madam Chairman. Don't you think as leader of the council it should be you doing the welcome as the figurehead of this council in here, as well as the chief executive, to show that officers and elected members are working together and it's joint work in between the council. I've got no objection to what the chief executive said at all, but I just think that that officers and councillors work together. There's a mix of stuff in here with what officers done, what councillors have done, and actually I think you should take the opportunity as leader of the council to say what your council has done, personally.
Councillor Borton, that has actually been brought to my attention by quite a few councillors. I have not yet had the opportunity to really talk it through with you.
Okay, I'm not going to be very popular, but I don't think I can actually vote on this until we've got it costed, because I don't know that I can actually look residents, hard-working, tax-paying residents in the eye and say, we are going to ask you for more council tax next year so we can put out 4 editions of a magazine, no matter how beautiful it is. So 2. Okay, well, it's in there 4. Okay, 2, I can't read. So I would just like to have it costed so that I can weigh up it's better value than being in the Downs Mile. All of that before we vote on it. But I know that's not going to be popular and you're going to say, no, we don't want to do that.
Councillor Bryce, I think Mrs Bell can come back, or Mr Green can, and assure you that this is a cheaper option than continuing with what we had. Would you just like to very briefly confirm that?
Yes, just a couple of things to mention, Councillor Bryce. There's a budget within which Helen and her team work, which is a matter of public record. It's in the budget book that's published with the published every year. And so far as the Borough Insight is concerned, the cost of that is going to be 18,000, I'm told, for 2 editions this year, which is the plan at the moment. I mean, we could go up to more, but that's actually no more than we were paying for the Downs Mail. But this is reaching more people and it's more pages, so I think it's better value than what we had before.
Councillor Bryce, I believe you're on the sounding board, so you have... We won't worry about that now. I was just going to say I believed you were part of it, Odd, and you could take it there. Well, all right, Councillor Bryce, and I apologise, I understood you were on it. I was going to say you could take it up strenuously there, or whoever is on the sounding board can actually do so, because obviously that is a place where councillors can funnel through their views on many issues to do with this area of work. Councillor Harwood, you did indicate, and it's only fair that I bring you in, and then we really must go to a vote.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. And Councillor Annabel Plackmore picked up on the issue anyway, really, around the emergency planning messaging. But it could fit in one of two, really. It could fit in engage with residents in an effective way, or information about council services and benefits. And I think actually it's a little bit Janus face that affects both. But the wording that I had considered was develop and maintain a robust media and communication strategy for emergency response and recovery. And something along those lines. And I know we've already got one, but it is such a fast-moving area that it is good practice to reconsider, look at it. Are we using social media to its best effect? Are we, and so on. Helen and I had recently attended a training course just on this subject, and there's a lot of quite interesting work coming out of continental Europe and North America and so on that I think we could potentially take a leaf out of their book.
Yes, I agree with your observations, and I think that's a really good place to put it. So we will add that in terms of the engaging with residents in an effective way. Am I able to also add just the point about the member sounding board? There is another meeting which an invite and an agenda will go out for, which is on the 1st of August. So obviously representatives and members of that group will have a chance to talk through any issues then.
Maybe this is an issue for the respective leaders of the groups to actually ensure that whoever we've got on it is able to put in the time to do it and actually does feed back the information to their respective groups, so that we do have fluidity, working both ways, communications both ways, for the benefit of that team as well as for the benefit of councillors. Mr Bailey, I'm just going to ask you what you've picked up, because we've got a recommendation here that Communications Action Plan 2017-18 be approved, which has been moved and seconded, but I'm aware that people have made various comments that we need to ensure we've picked them up so that they can be included, not on the recommendation, but that we know that we've actually picked them up.
Yeah. I can work these into the body of the minute rather than through the decision. So essentially what I've got here is some understanding about the time and expense required to carry out the actions in the plan, some clarification over the levels of support, and emergency planning as well, something added in there about emergency planning. And they're the main points I've got there in communication with the business community. Yep, I've got that as well in there.
All those points. On page 23 is the recommendation, and it is that the Communications Action Plan 2017-18 be approved. Those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I think.
Yes, 12.
Those against? 3. Any abstentions? I don't think so. Thank you, members. So we move to agenda item 15, which we have on, I do believe I'm correct now, on 14. Yes, sorry, 14, which is on page 34. Mr. Green, I think, are you leading on this as well?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. We have a 5-year strategic plan covering the years 2015-2020. This is refreshed each year, and you'll remember that there was quite an extensive refresh last year and discussions at each of the service committees about changes to the strategic plan. What this report does is set out the process for the 2018-19 refresh of the strategic plan. And an important input to this is the resident survey that I mentioned earlier, which we'll have results from in September. And what comes out of the resident survey, we hope will feed into the refresh of the corporate strategy and also into the medium-term financial strategy, which is the next item on the agenda. So the table on page 36 of your paper sets out the timetable for the update of the strategic plan. And specifically, it proposes a workshop in September where you'll be able to see the results of the resident survey, and we'll be able to go into them in more detail than would be possible in a committee meeting. So you're asked now simply to approve this timetable for the strategic plan. Thank you.
Councillor Garland.
I move the recommendations on the papers.
Let's have a show of hands to actually confirm that. And members, although it's not part of the recommendation, are you happy to say that it's a good idea to have a workshop? Thank you very much. So we move to agenda item 15, page 39 to 74. Just before I ask Mr. Green to come in on this, I do not want us to get bogged down yet again with appendices. So can I just explain to anybody who's not picked up on it that where it says the draft medium-term strategy is Appendix A, if I can put it that way, and the appendix that is listed in here is actually an appendix to the draft strategy. Is that clear for everybody? Because if you look at the draft strategy, it doesn't actually say Appendix 1. It doesn't say it on it. If you look at page 44, it actually makes it clear. The following documents are published with this report. Appendix 1, the medium-term financial strategy. So that is it. And the other appendix is an appendix to the medium-term financial strategy. So please, I don't think we need to have any discussion about its numbering. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You remember that I brought a report to the last meeting of this committee which set out the background to the medium-term financial strategy, and I won't go through again all the things that were discussed then, but basically we face a lot of uncertainty so far as the local government funding environment and the national economy is concerned. But so far as the Council is concerned, our finances are in pretty good shape. We delivered against our budget last year. Savings for delivery this year are broadly on target, and our reserves are adequate without being excessive. Now, drawing up the medium-term financial strategy is really very difficult because of the uncertainties that I mentioned. And the government faces huge spending pressures, and we really don't know at this stage how that is going to impact on the local government sector. But unfortunately, the lesson of history is that local government spending does tend to get squeezed if the national government faces pressures. So the way that the medium-term financial strategy seeks to address that is to present a number of different scenarios, which I've called favourable, neutral, and adverse. And we need to plan for the adverse outcome, obviously hope that the position isn't as bad as that. And what that gives us is a range of possible outcomes, which are set out at the bottom of page 40 in your papers. And they range from a surplus at the end of 5 years of 800,000 on the favourable scenario, to a 7.7 million budget gap on the adverse scenario. And that 7.7 million, to give you an idea of what that means, that's 22% of our total budget. So that would really have very serious consequences for us. What the medium-term financial strategy, or the draft medium-term financial strategy that is set out here, proposes is that in seeking to overcome that budget gap, there isn't one single thing that will solve the problem, that will plug the gap. It's suggested that we take a mixture of different approaches, so continued improvements in efficiency, generating additional income, business improvement and transformation, and as a last resort, cuts to services. Now, we don't have to make final decisions yet. We will learn more, I'm sure, in the autumn with the Chancellor's autumn budget statement. And under the neutral scenario, we won't actually have to generate any additional savings until the year after next. It's projecting a balanced position for next year. But we do need to start planning. We need to plan for the worst scenario. And that does mean that we're looking to you as members to start thinking about the difficult decisions that you would have to make in that adverse scenario. So what the report does is asks you, in the first two recommendations, to simply to note the assumptions underlying those different scenarios and the financial projections that arise from them, and to agree the draft medium-term financial strategy and the approach that's being proposed that's set out in the appendix to this report, Appendix 1, as the Chairman has explained. Thank you.
Members, unusually for me, I am going to ask a question at the outset myself, and that is, Mr. Green, because I don't really see it in here. In view of the current rate of interest and in view of the uncertainty and all the scenarios we're looking at, are we considering at all whether it might be advisable to do some modest borrowing now rather than wait until we actually need it, if I can put it that way? Because I do think it would be interesting for councillors to know if we have any thoughts on that at all as we start to move forward.
It's a very good point because although we're not planning at the moment to borrow until next year when we actually need the money, there is an argument, as Madam Chairman you've said, that if we were to borrow now, we could take advantage of the relatively low interest rates that we have, and there is the possibility, as you all know, that the Bank of England will put up base rates, which would feed through to our borrowing costs. And it's a very difficult judgment to make, and I'm in close touch with our external Treasury advisors, Arlene Close. In fact, I've got a meeting with them on Friday this week, and we'll take into account their advice, what their projections are about when interest rates will go up. But we don't want to borrow just for the sake of it, because if we were to borrow, it would mean even more cash sitting in our bank account on which we'd be earning next to nothing. So it's not a straightforward decision. All I can tell members, it's something that is being reviewed on a very regular basis and with the benefit, as I say, of third-party advice.
Members, I don't want you to go away with the idea that I'm advocating it, but I thought it was something that members do need to know, that obviously it's looked at and considered. It's a very fine balancing act, as has been said, because also I'm looking at Councillor Garland's face. As we all know, once we borrow, we have to start paying back, and that feeds into the revenue budget. So it's a difficult issue, but important, I think, that we're looking at it. I have Councillor Harper first.
On that point, could Lee officers perhaps, when we have our next committee meeting, come back with some details about that, if you're talking to the advisors, looking into a cost-benefit analysis of either perhaps borrowing earlier and then using our money later when interest rates are higher, or vice versa, because it's going to be very much of a subjective decision, for the council, but it potentially could save us quite a bit of money if we get it right. So it might be worth looking at it at our next meeting, at least if you can give us all the parameters and so on, even if we don't make the decision then. We know the methodology we'd need to follow. Looking at the report, it's obviously well put together. We clearly spent a lot of work last year in terms of identifying the savings on page 74, which at that time, which had up to, £3.5 million, and that was a pretty painful process, I think, across the council, actually, to get there. We managed to identify savings with not too many sort of service reductions there. But then if we're now looking at the adverse situation where we're looking for another sort of £7 million or something, you start to get to the point where we're going to pull the shutters down, or flog off the town hall, because, it took us a year to identify £3.5 million. So to identify another £7 million, it just strikes me as a bit of a, tall order, and presumably we'll have to do work along that. But it would also be useful, I suppose, at our next meeting when we perhaps know more from the autumn statement as to whether the favourable and the neutral options might be looking more likely for next year, because those seem to imply we don't need to make any more cuts at this stage.
Mr. Green, did you want to comment?
I'm very happy to provide more information for members. I'm in your hands. We do have quite a full agenda at the September meeting, so I could just as well provide the information in a briefing paper if members would be happy with that.
Members, I think that would be acceptable. Yes? Thank you. Yes? Councillor Garland.
It's only to come in on your point about borrowing. Just to be clear, that's borrowing for the capital programme and not for revenue. Because
Councillor Garland, you must know I would never borrow for revenue.
But I think it's important to
clarify
clarify
over
that.
my dead body.
Because the medium-term financial strategy as outlaid here is primarily about savings and revenue. So I want to make it quite clear that the borrowing is for the capital programme, not for revenue. The only other point I would make is the assumptions all seem perfectly fine, and the usual ones that we have and are probably accurate as to the best we can predict. Which scenario would Mr. Green suggest to members I suspect he won't go for the favourable. And being a fairly conservative small c accountant and finance man, and a very good finance man at that, what scenario would he favour? Would he favour a mix between the adverse and the neutral one, maybe?
The whole point about presenting scenarios is that we don't know, and I couldn't pretend to say which is the most likely outcome. I just repeat what I said before, that I think we have to plan for the adverse outcome.
Not nice to think about, but wise to do, Councillor. When we're facing such an uncertain future, it is always wise to plan for the worst and then be pleasantly surprised if it doesn't happen. If you plan for the best, then you're going to have some nasty surprises. What do we all think? We don't know, do we? But I think what you said is probably correct, a mixture between the middle and the adverse. I can't, in my wildest imagining, think it's going to be wonderful.
I think taking £7.7 million out of the organisation over a 5-year period would put it on its backside, I think. So hopefully the actual outcome will be a mixture of the two, or maybe even neutral.
I would hope to agree. I would like to agree with you, and I hope so. It's time that the work that local government does and how cleverly and how well they have organised themselves in general has not yet been recognised, I think. I mean, we are probably the most efficient branch of public services, and I don't say that because we're it. I think it's proven to be true. Right, Councillor Perry.
First of all, I would like to say to you, Mark, I think it's a very, very good report. I really, really do. And it is a difficult subject, and I read it with a lot of interest. So I think it's very well put together, if I may say so. The scenario analysis is extremely good. I'm fully in favour of that. But I would like to make 1 or 2 comments. And I think the neutral is a little bit probably favourable. You make the statement of, first of all, an orderly Brexit. My own experience working in this particular city, I think it's pretty unlikely, actually. I've been in enough all-night meetings where they've done the last-minute changes, and I honestly don't see it being disorderly. I shouldn't probably make that statement, but I honestly think it could be very difficult because there's a lot of complex issues there. The other one, I think, more important immediately, I think there is, and you mentioned it in a part of your report, the depreciation of the pound. And I think there's going to be continued pressure on that because of the uncertainties around. And I think the pound, despite the issues with the euro as well, but I think in reality the pound is going to come under a lot of pressure. And that will put pressure on running costs, particularly for an organisation like ourselves. So I think there's going to be pressure on costs outside our control. I'm sorry it sounds a bit depressing, but and I'm not convinced that Brexit will be orderly. I'm sure we'll come to a solution, but I very much doubt if it will be orderly, and I think there'll be a lot of compromises and pragmatic issues coming out of that. So actually, as Councillor Garland quite rightly said, I think it's probably between neutral and adverse. I would actually like to see these scenarios. I think you've got to continually review these scenarios, I suspect. And there's a lot of fluidity between them. So, but I really do appreciate it. But I'd actually quite like to see a scenario where maybe the Brexit was a little bit more conservative and maybe account is taken of possible, they may not be, but possible further pressures on the pound which will affect costs. I mean, that might be something you can come up with later on. But as I said, I think the analysis is really, really good, and I really do appreciate it. So I think it's something we really need. So thank you very much for that.
Mr. Green, did you want to come back on?
I don't have anything to add to that. You can see from the table on page 61, the inflation assumptions, what might happen if, say, depreciation of the pound led to inflation going up to 2%, but it could, as you say, be even higher than that.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to look at the other income figure, if I may, because if we've got pressure on costs, we need to look at how we're going to offset those. The first question I've got is on page 56, you summarise the income across the various services at 17.3 million. If I turn to page 71, 2 or 3, showing the 3 different examples, you show the other income at 16,599 consistently. So the first question I have is, why is there a discrepancy of 800,000 on other income? And secondly, I strived for a long time to get our commercialisation strategy separated out from the other income line so that we could see how successful and progressive our other income was over the future years. And I see it's now got absorbed back into either other income or into the savings figure on page 74. And I'd like to see much more clarity of that and how we might bring any of that forward. We're embarking on a major property investment programme, and surely it is to provide the council with a greater degree of resilience to our revenue budget. So I would just ask whether that would be possible when you next review the figures. I think you are being very pessimistic, and we can all pat you on the back for that. But if it's going to result in, I can't remember the expression used earlier, but flat on our backsides as a consequence, that would be failure in my book. So looking at the revenue line, I think the income line, rather, becomes more paramount importance. But do please just come back on my first point about the discrepancy.
Yes, the figure for other income in 1718, what you've seen on page 56 is a gross figure, whereas the 16.6 million is a net figure. So there's a bit of netting off with income. A lot of the income streams that we've got are for things like shared services, where we're collecting income from other authorities that are part of MKS, but at the same time incurring expenditure. So that's basically the reason. There's a bit of netting off in those figures, which is the reason why there's a discrepancy there. And I take your point about commercialisation, because the other income includes all the things that members will be familiar with, and you get a flavour of it in the table on page 56. So we get a healthy contribution to income from parking and so on. But definitely the hope is that we will generate income from new sources, and I'm very happy in subsequent reports to split those out so that you can see the contribution that we're getting from new income. And in particular, there's income potentially coming in from the capital programme. In the appendices, starting on page 71, you can see there's a line near the bottom which says revenue costs of capital programme. So for the first few years, that's showing costs, being the cost of borrowing and the cost of depreciation. But as we go further into the 5 years, the capital programme should be generating revenues. So that is another source of income. And there's a report later on the agenda this evening about how the housing and regeneration strategy, it's hoped, will generate income in the future.
Wish to come back briefly?
Well, yes, I can see now in 22-23 there's a figure of 488,000, which is income, you're saying, from the capital programme. I think it's just a question of presentation then, so I don't have to delve down there. It should be under commercialisation income, I think. I also have I mean, if your 16,599 figure is correct, we've got a big jump from 1718 to 1819 in other income. I was trying to reduce that by offering you 17,306, 301 rather. But can you explain the big jump in other income?
Basically, the jump is to do with the savings that are being delivered in 1718. But probably the best thing to satisfy you, Councillor McLaughlin, is if I provide an analysis of the movement between the 2 years so that you can see exactly what's caused that increase.
I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I know I should know the answer to this question, Mr Green, but sadly I don't. The last time we looked at this, and indeed I think the last time it went to full council, there was a figure of 1.2 million, and it was either in 20 to 21 or 21 to 22. And it was a sort of savings and or something figure. And the reason I think you'd got it in there was for conservative reasons, conservative small c. So I can't remember what that was. I'd be grateful if you could just remind us, because I don't see it in these figures here. Now, personally, I quite like the fact that you're really pessimistic, because I can still remember when we got the settlement last year and all of a sudden our savings had to jump from, I don't know, something like 1.7 up to something ridiculous, 4.2 million, and there was a huge sharp intake of breath. So sadly, I quite like your pessimism. Personally, I'm a glass half full, positive kind of person, but I think in these circumstances, we have to err on the side of caution. So although there might not be savings that need to be made in the early years, I still think we should be looking out for them just in case, because it's always nice to have something in your back pocket.
Thank you. On the specific point, Councillor Blackmore, about the figure of, it was actually 1.3 million, and that was built into the current projections, not these ones, from 2020, because if 100% business rates retention were to have been introduced, we'd have faced additional burdens. And I've referred to that in paragraph 6.6 of the draft MTFS. That 1.3 million is still in these figures because we don't know what will happen in 2020, whether 100% business rates retention is introduced. But because the government is likely to have to balance its books one way or another, whether it's by putting additional burdens on local government or in some other way, the chances are that we will still face something like that. I mean, who knows whether it will be 1.3 million or whatever, but I've kept that figure in there, as you say, as a provision.
Members, I have nobody else indicating. Councillor Bryce?
Just really quickly on the line item on the planning review. So on page 74, we've got development control application under policy and resources total savings arising from planning review, including income generation. I think we've just hopped across, actually, rather than it being from the planning review. Have we just hopped across that 120 that we thought we were going to get, and then the election was called and it was that windfall that we thought we were going to get didn't appear? Or are those genuine savings from the planning review, which, given I don't think most members have seen yet, I certainly haven't. That's just something to flag, that we haven't seen that. But I think what you've done is just taken the 120 that we thought we were going to get from the change in policy, but was delayed because the legislation didn't come forward because of the election, and just topped that across. So I think as long as we just note that that's a slightly different description to that, although I suppose it's broadly covered. But
Mr. Green?
The 120,000 isn't actually to do with the introduction of or the increase in planning fees, which is what you're referring to, because we were originally hoping that that would come in 1718. The 120,000 was quite separate. It was because there's a review of the planning service that's just been completed, the expectation was that through a combination of things, whether it's cost savings or additional income generation from planning agreements with developers, there was a target put in of 120,000 for next year, for 18-19. That how we delivered that, we still need to consider, but that is separate from the planning fee increase that you're referring to.
In that case, I think I'm quite concerned about having that in there, given that we haven't seen the report and we don't know how feasible that is. But I don't know how other members feel.
Mr Green, I think it's true to say that the relevant chairs and vice chairs have had sight of that, haven't they? So I think you have some, eventually, they have seen it, let's put it that way. No. Do you want to come back? Councillor Blackmore, you indicated you'd like to come back quickly.
I did, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to move the recommendations on page 39, actually.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Two of them, one and two are for noting, so all I ask is that noted? Thank you. Three, though, is to agree the draft medium-term strategy set out at Appendix 1. Is that agreed? May I have a show of hands, please? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr Green. I'd like to reiterate that it was a joy to read that report. Well, no, it wasn't a joy to read the gloom and doom, but it was a joy to read a report that was so easy to understand. Thank you. Can we move then to agenda item 16 on page 75? Mr McGuinness, Mrs Coburn, one of you, Mrs Coburn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So the purpose of this report is to seek committee approval to commence consultation on the council tax reduction scheme for next year, 2018-19. The proposals, the changes that are proposed within the consultation relate to claimants in receipt of universal credit only and not part of the existing scheme, and are aimed at providing a level of stability to the award for universal credit claimants rather than reduce the level of support available to them. It is intended that consultation with key stakeholders from the voluntary sector, registered landlords, representative group of benefit claimants will take place next month for 6 weeks. For the purpose of the consultation, option 1 is identified as the preferred change because there will be more stability around payments and customers will not get confused with different council tax bills each time changes are made. So just to sum up, the committee is asked to approve commencement of the consultation, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Harper.
Excuse me, it's not a question so much. When I read this, I was a bit concerned because obviously, universal credit's coming in. We've got to respond to it. We've got to respond in a way which is going to be fair to the council in terms of administering it and keeping presumably additional costs down. But equally, we've got to be more fair to the residents of Maidstone who rely on this scheme to actually, help get through on the finances. So I'm a bit concerned at option 1, where we're only looking at effectively 6 monthly reviews. Could be a bit inflexible, because if the scheme is going to change, as it says, in between, on average, 11 and 36 times during a year, if we are only reviewing it twice, people could suddenly find themselves potentially significantly out of pocket, in the first 6 months of a year or the second 6 months. So I was wondering, depending what the rest of the committee thought, option 2 struck me as possibly a better way. However, if most people think option 1 is the way forward, I wondered if we could perhaps set it so that rather than reviewing it every 6 months, it was reviewed either every 4 months or every 3 months. So we were doing at least 3 or 4 reviews a year, so that it was slightly more responsive in terms of the impact this could have on residents.
If I could just come back on that point. The 6 months is what we currently do for claimants on family credit. And the changes that are coming through and the feedback from other councils that have gone, have had the full rollout out of universal credit, is a lot of the changes are quite small. Now, we would still be able to pick up on any large changes which have impact on the claimants. And also, the claimants still have a duty to inform us of any changes. So if the changes were significant and they weren't getting enough council tax support that they thought they should be, then certainly we would look at those cases rather than wait for the first 6 months.
Councillor Harper, do you wish to come back? Or...
Let me think about it.
Councillor Blackmore.
Madam Chairman, this strikes me that we're just looking at the consultation, so I'd be happy to move the recommendations, really, because surely what's more important is what comes out of the consultation, and we analyse that. I think this is probably a very standard format for the consultation, so let's just make the decision and get on with it. So I'd like to move those recommendations, if that's okay.
Councillor McLaughlin next.
Thank you, Chair. Just for a point of clarification, are we still at the point of introducing universal credit that only applies to single working people, or has it now got broader use? And my second question is, or broader application rather, my second question is, do you know what other authorities are doing in this respect in terms of consultation?
Firstly, we're not expecting the full rollout of universal credit until around 2022. And as far as other councils are concerned, I think some of them initially started to deal with the changes as they came in, and they found that administratively they were just sending out council tax bills as each change came, which in effect was changing the payments that the claimants were due to make, and the claimants were getting totally confused with different bills. In some cases, one council reported, I think it was 32 changes for one claimant in a year, which meant that they're virtually getting the council tax bill every month or every week.
So are other authorities tending to look at doing a twice-yearly review?
Yes, they are, because that's in a lot of the current practice that they adopt already anyway.
Members, this has been moved and seconded. Again, you have 2 recommendations to be agreed and 2 for noting. In this case, are you happy if they're all taken together? So could I have a show of hands, please, for those in agreement? Against? 1. And no abstentions. Members, thank you. We're going fairly quickly. Are you happy to move to the next item? All right, thank you. So we move to page 92, agenda item 17. Just before I ask Mr. Cornwall to introduce this, can I just point out to members that attached to this report is an exempt appendix in part 2. We've got to be careful not to stray into that, but if you do wish to discuss it, we will have to move into part 2, because if we actually look at this and agree the recommendations, then when we get to point 2, there will be no discussion on the appendix, because we will already have agreed the actual papers. So members, I'd be very, very clear that if you do wish to discuss that, you must indicate so, and we will have to go into part 2. With that, Mr. Cornell, would you like to introduce it?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, so this plan builds upon the decision that was made back in November of last year by this committee to refocus our commercialisation activities upon housing and regeneration. Since then, the move has been reinforced by our capital programme, which has ring-fenced £28 million of spend for this type of activity within our rolling 5-year medium-term financial strategy period. The plan therefore sets out the principles that should guide the Council's investment decisions around this area of work. The plan also sets out how the Council should work in a structured way to identify and facilitate the delivery of various regeneration opportunities too. So this plan really deals with 2 separate but related matters, namely housing development and regeneration. So I'll deal with both of them in turn. So in terms of housing development, the plan sets out that the main driver is commercial return through developing market-rented housing, achieving long-term positive cash flows through our ability to identify local opportunities, deliver them, and finance them through extremely competitive borrowing from the Public Sector Loans Board. The plan then goes on to evaluate the Council's current position in terms of embarking on this new area of work, as well as our operating environment that we're effectively stepping into too. The plan points out that we have some land holdings that we can start to deploy, but it also identifies that we will need to secure land for these opportunities within the private market, and indeed there's a paper later this evening that deals with that, an example of that rather. Just by way of illustration, our investment of £28 million will yield a portfolio of around 140 market-rented homes that will be retained by the Council's property company, Maidstone Property Holdings Limited, and this plan will effectively double as the business plan for Maidstone Property Holdings. It is suggested that our developments will generally be for 1/3 market rent, 1/3 market sale via the developer contractor or a joint venture with them, and 1/3 for affordable housing via a housing association. Therefore, the Council spend in these projects will effectively leverage in much more spend through our partners. The main focus of our activities will be to develop new homes for the portfolio, and a new team has been created to work on these types of projects, and they are already performing well, identifying new projects, and indeed have sort of considered the marketing mix for our activities here in terms of the product, place, price and promotion, and that's all contained within the plan. The plan then goes on to set out the financial assumptions and the model for appraising new schemes and the target hurdle rates that we should be looking to achieve, the governance arrangements for approving new projects, the risks that the new projects will need to be considered against, and the due diligence protocols that will be required. Turning next to regeneration, the plan sets out the following. The Council has broader regeneration ambitions that are of a scale and value in excess of what we can deliver through our own direct resources. However, the Council does have a leadership role to play in signalling to stakeholders as to what the opportunities could be, and could also undertake some activities or interventions that would make them more viable and desirable to the private sector to take forward. And really this type of working is shown by the activities we are currently undertaking for the former Royal Mail Sorting Office, where here we are looking to provide clarity around the vision for the site, de-risking the site through the exploration of the constraints and opportunities, and preparing of a master plan that responds to these issues that we then look to the private sector to take forward. Clearly, the Maidstone East site, the Royal Mail Sorting Office site, was an opportunity area, and so the plan then goes on to suggest that the Council should, via the Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee, identify further opportunity areas, and that these can be analysed as to what interventions might be appropriate, but at the very least it will involve having them formally adopted with the Council commissioning master plan work to set out our aspirations for them. Potential opportunity areas are set out in Appendix 2, but these are illustrative this evening, and Appendix 3 contains an update to the work that we're doing on the Maidstone Town Centre 5-year investment and development plan, and these areas of work effectively converge. Doing this work will put the Council in a strong position for the 5-year review of our local plan and the next local plan too, as well as generally taking a greater oversight of the quality of what is delivered within the borough on these regeneration opportunity areas. Many of the suggested opportunity areas will be mixed use, perhaps residential led, but others could be focused upon public space and amenities, or indeed improved green spaces. Undertaking this work also puts us in a good place to access the different infrastructure funds that are becoming more and more available from central government. So that is a very brief summary of the plan, but I'll of course be pleased to take any questions councillors may have on it. Thank you.
Councillor Blackmore, you were first.
I can remember when we looked at the strategic documents, there were different names of them. So we had the housing strategy, but then we also had a regeneration and housing strategy. And I was slightly confused because I think one was to do with capital, the capital programme, and the other was more to do with housing, the delivery, I think. So here, under 2.1, you're referring to the housing strategy, but then under recommendation 1, you're referring to the housing development and regeneration investment plan. And I'm just trying to work out this housing development and regeneration investment plan, does that sit with the housing and regeneration strategy or the housing strategy? Because to me, this is capital. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yes. Really what I was trying to do here is, because we have a housing strategy anyway, I would say this area of work is a subset of that. So that's the reason why in the end I called it a plan, so effectively it should slot into underneath all the broader work we do on housing. But obviously it's a discrete area of work, but I didn't want to have two sort of housing type strategies running concurrently. So I think it will be, so that's why I've labelled it as a plan. I hope that makes sense.
So this is effectively taking the two, putting it together under one single document. Is that right? No.
It's giving us a plan through which to develop our capital programme effectively.
So it's part of the housing regeneration strategy that we agreed here before?
We haven't agreed a housing and regeneration strategy. We said we were going to We said we were going to introduce one, but on reflection, it made more sense to label it as a plan and slot it under the housing strategy that already exists and continues to get updated. So I would personally sort of focus on the contents, and I can sort of elaborate a bit more sort of outside the meeting on that.
Councillor Blackmore, you're still looking perplexed. I'm sure Mr Cornell will actually talk to you outside if you need it. Members, are you all
May I just ask one more question,
please?
please?
Let me just ask. Members, are you all reasonably clear with what is being said? Thank you. You can ask another question.
Right, thank you very much. So you've labelled it a plan as opposed to a strategy. Does it have the same status as other strategies, or is it a lesser document or a more superior document? I'm just trying to work out where it sits.
I think it's giving us technical information as to how we deliver the capital programme. So it's setting out how we're going to spend the money, what financial assumptions we're making, what financial returns we're seeking, what risks we're looking at, and what sort of due diligence protocols we're looking to follow. So it's quite technical, and I wanted it to be something that everyone could sign up to here, and then the officers have got a very sort of clear steer as to how they should be working.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. I refer to paragraph 2.8, wherein you say that it's an area of work the Council has not undertaken for several years and recognises that we don't have the necessary, or we didn't have the necessary skills to do it. You then go on to say that you have now established a team comprising staff who have been trained with the necessary skills but coming from other areas within the Council. Now, I'm not quite sure how you're going to answer this, or indeed whether I want you to answer it at this forum, but I need some reassurance about the skills that you've set up in place to see this sort of project through. And what I want to suggest as a way of doing that is that you have a workshop for councillors where you can explain the structure and the responsibilities that you have put in place to achieve that. So I would like you to consider that and perhaps respond to that.
Yes, thank you. Happy to do the workshop, and we've sort of suggested that previously, and that will be put in place. Obviously, in terms of the skills that we now have in-house, obviously this is an area of work that I've worked in extensively over the years, but also whilst the team that have come together do have experience of delivering capital projects, but we're sort of bringing them together and sort of building on that experience with training packages and so on. The other thing to point out as well is in bringing together this team, we're not sort of bringing all that skill set required in-house. We're actually able to commission the different skills that we need on a project-by-project basis in terms of architectural skills, employers' agent skills, cost consultant skills, and so on.
Chair, may I just quickly respond? I respect your expertise in this area. I'm just looking for further clarification and reassurance, so I feel comfortable with the success rate that we're going to achieve. If you accept that, I'd appreciate it.
Councillor Harper.
I think it's a good report. I was going to ask some questions on the yellow papers, but they can probably wait for another time. In paragraph 2.1, because obviously in terms of your introduction, you were saying clearly the council doesn't actually own much land in the town centre. Well, apart from the one or two developments we purchased, but moving on over this plan, we'll be looking at other ways. But I welcome what you've got in 2.10, looking at some of the existing car parks within the town centre, because I was going to suggest places, things like, Medway Street and the King Street car park, as to whether you could build over the top of those. I think I've mentioned that to you before. But also, in terms of the place part on that, on the grid on 2.9, we're talking obviously predominantly town centre regeneration areas, but I was also thinking perhaps we should be thinking wider in terms of some of our sort of, I can't remember what the phrase is now in the local plan, it's sort of rural service areas, so some of the larger villages, because there might be opportunities in some of those which come up over the life of this thing. And I know we've talked in the past that, we do need to reflect on the fact that, we need affordable housing or whatever you want to call it, this type of development in some of those more rural areas, because otherwise, where do people in those areas live? So I was just going to encourage that in place that we, adopt a wider approach in terms of looking at opportunities.
Yes, thank you for that. Really what I was sort of trying to signify here is that the private sector is delivering, very strongly outside of the town centre areas, so it's going to be more difficult for us to acquire the land, where we're looking to acquire it for a long-term payback through market rent, because that land will have a higher value for predominantly private sale-led schemes, and the private sector, is well placed to deliver those. So it's not to say we can't look, and we do get some opportunities outside the town centre, but I think the ones that fit our financial parameters are probably going to be brownfield sites, more centrally located.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, well, a borough-wide approach, Councillor Harford, sends red warning signals to me, and I shall not take that any further at this stage. What I wanted to come back, and I really wanted to ask a really basic philosophical question. And really, it's back to para 2.2. I sit on the CHE committee, the Communities Housing Committee, and the issue of homelessness comes up all the time, and it's a very critical issue here. And here we're developing houses or apartments or whatever for market rent. And I was wondering, as a council, and I know perhaps this has all been discussed before, so I apologise if it hasn't, but I do wonder whether this is the right thing we should be doing. I'm only asking the question, and because it does seem to me that as a council we have particular duties to do, and we need to think about and address those. So that's the first point. The second point is your SWOT analysis is interesting, and I think it's actually pretty skewed, actually, because I think your problems are in the threats. I'm not going to repeat the things I said about Brexit, but I think changing market conditions is a high-risk area, really high risk. And the other one, I can see construction skills shortage. Again, I think a high risk, actually, and could get worse. So I'm just wondering how much you could really consider that, because I think, SWOT analysis is very important, and I'm pleased to see it. But I do think that's very much skewed in there, and I think that could be quite serious issues if you want to take this further. So those are my 2 points. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Yes, thank you. In terms of should we be doing this for all affordable housing, well, a byproduct of all the development we do will be the Section 106 agreements, which mean we have to deliver a proportion of all the houses built for affordable housing. So, a third of everything we do will go to affordable housing. It'll just be funded, owned and managed by a local housing association. So, I would suggest some comfort around that. In terms of the SWOT analysis, no particular weighting is given to the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and I certainly share your concerns on all those threats that have been listed. But what I would say in terms of construction cost, obviously we can, set budgets, go out to tender and seek fixed price contracts from contractors, on a scheme-by-scheme basis, but it is something that we will have to keep a very close eye on. In theory, if construction costs race ahead, we should see land values move in the other direction, but it's not always as simple as that.
Okay. Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Chair. I just really want to say I'm very glad to see the Council focusing on this kind of provision. I think we're very fortunate to have officers with the experience and commercial expertise of Mr Cornwall, Mr Foster and all those other folks behind the scenes. And I have every confidence with their expertise and everything that they've delivered since I've been on the Council and I've been witness to that this will be a great success. So thank you. And I think thank you also for including the workshop as a kind of catch-up point for those of us that may want a bit of clarification in the recommendations, and I just wanted to move the recommendations on the paper and thank you for your work on this.
Councillor Garland pipped you to the post and you were the next to speak. Councillor Garland.
Yeah, I don't want to add too much more than what Councillor Bryce has said. I think it's a very good report and I think this is a very exciting scheme. And in fact, we're putting £28 million behind it, whether ultimately borrowed or not, I think is a real beacon of opportunity that we can highlight to other district authorities. The only question I wanted to add, which might be a bit controversial, is what's the officer delegation on this? Because my view, in terms of the acquisition of land and pursuing individual projects, I would like to see the officer delegation being quite high, whether it's in pound notes or whatever, to reduce some of the friction that you'll get at meetings like this for individual projects. Now, members will get involved at the planning stage and local ward members on individual projects, but in terms of the acquisition of land and the pursuit of individual projects, what would be the officer delegation, and is that too low?
Mr Cornwall, do you wish to?
Yes. As I've sort of suggested in here, that this committee would be the decision maker for each schemes that comes forward. I personally would see that as quite workable, but I think it's, obviously it's very important that we, understand the decision that we're trying to make about the schemes, and what we're looking at is the financial returns and are they credible investments, and try and set aside, some of the complications and the nuances that can be picked up perhaps through the planning committee. But I haven't seen anything to suggest that the governance structures that we have in place now would sort of stop us delivering, but of course be pleased to keep it under review and explore changes. And I guess the property side of the delegations sit with Mark rather than myself, and I think that's probably a better check and balance anyway.
The only reason I ask about that is because at the previous meeting there was an issue that arose where an opportunity was presented to PNR, but for whatever reason wasn't pursued by PNR at that time, when as I saw it, it was a perfectly good opportunity. And clearly, my view is that we should be fairly gung-ho about this, and I think this is a fairly gung-ho approach, and I think it's a very good, well-costed and well-explained approach to that. But I just fear that the tendency of members, and I will be controversial, is to slow things down and to get into levels of detail that would add to that slowing down of the process. Now, if you're quite happy with the governance process as it is, then that's fine. But I, for one, certainly from the experience perhaps the last meeting we had, can see problems there if those governance arrangements aren't reviewed. But if you're happy with it, then I'm content too.
Councillor Garland, I'm going to just say I think it's vitally important, I keep reinforcing this, it's vitally important that ward councillors are advised of what may happen. No, but the point is that ward councillors also have to understand, and it's happened in High Street, I lost my rag over something when I thought we hadn't been told, but it wasn't to try and stop the process. It was to say, we've got some information here, or we know something that we need to feed into this. So as long as that happens, there shouldn't really be any reason to hold the process up. But we'll live and learn as we go along, I think. I don't have anybody else indicating. Councillor Bryce has moved the recommendations on the papers, which are on page 92. Councillor Garland has seconded them. So could I please have a show of hands? Those in agreement? I think that's unanimous. That is unanimous. Thank you, members. Members, do you want a very quick break? Yes, please. All right. It is 10 to 9. Please, could you be back on the dot of 9? Thank you. Members, officers, could you take your seats, please? We're just about to reconvene. Members, before we go into part 2, while we're still in open session, could I just say that this is the last meeting that Mrs Callaghan will be doing with us, and to thank her for all the service we've had over the years from you, which I think you're going to be sorely missed, and a big act to follow. So thank you, and members, I think if you'd like to show your appreciation of the service we've had. And with that, I move that the public be excluded from the meeting for the items set out in part 2 of the agenda because of the likely disclosure of exempt information for the reasons specified having applied the public interest test. And if you could make sure that you turn the